The Always Run is best described as a modern 2D space western platformer that engages its audience with its captivating story and beautiful art style, albeit the janky movement. Aiden is a three-armed mutant and a galactic bounty hunter who relies on his slick parkour skills and his ability to nimbly slash his opponents with his three composite swords. He is your typical Western protagonist. He denies being a hero of the people and acts like he only minds his own business. He possesses skills that allow him to survive in the wild, although he's a man who follows his personal code. Underneath all that cloak and helmet lies a reason, an end goal that Aiden has been following since the very beginning, plus a current story and a plot twist. From time to time, we see fragments of his memories from the past, and we are led to believe that we understand what happens until the final segment of the story. Besides all that mysterious and cold bounty hunter identity, Aiden genuinely feels like a person who you can connect with. Even though he poses as a loner, certain situations push him to make friends or alliances. Through these alliances, we see what kind of person he is. These interactions and dialogue make you empathize with him more easily. Aiden is a convincing character, and while playing the game, you become committed to the story, not just because of Aiden, but also because of the world he is in. As we progress, we get to know more about the galaxy we are in, and a simple revenge story turns into a conspiracy that affects the fate of the whole galaxy. And as we reach the final boss, we understand that Aiden's story is connected to a much bigger scheme. The only negative side of the story for me, and obviously for many people playing the game, was the cliffhanger ending. The developers, Alawar, probably planned a sequel, or maybe ran out of time and money, or simply wanted to focus on their other more lucrative games. Either way, the game came out in 2021, and to this day there has been still no news of a sequel. Given how things ended and how committed I was, it is a little annoying to leave such a captivating story behind unfinished. Despite being incomplete, The Always Run has a very solid story and setting. However, in the end, this is a platformer. So, what about the general flow of the gameplay? Let's agree on this. The Always Run is not Celeste. Aiden's movement does not feel sharp and accurate, and I think that for the most part, it is on purpose. Aiden is not as precise as Hayes, the assassin girl we first met hunting Lee Steeljaw. He is a child, but not meticulous. Even though he wears a helmet and a cape, he is not much of an assassin who carries hidden blades and assassinates his victims silently. I mean, come on, the guy has a mechanical third arm, 3 composite swords and a freaking space shotgun. Sure, assassination is included in the game, but you cannot take enemies out one by one without getting noticed. All this to say, it is not quite possible to have precise control over exactly where Aiden jumps, how he turns around, or how he clears a certain obstacle in his way, basically how he navigates through the parkour. And the combat is the same. Most of the time it is you punching the buttons to beat a bunch of enemies in your way, besides occasionally dodging bullets and using your third arm to break the defense of shielded enemies. With the game's defense, it focuses more on action and adventure parts than on platforming. You do solve puzzles and navigate obstacles, but it is all designed for Aiden to stylishly slash through enemies and move toward the goal. Nearly each level contains ample enemies to beat, so it is not a Tomb Raider game where you stop for a while and solve a complex puzzle in between fights. It's a fast-paced linear platform with limited time and content to tell its story. I don't think players should expect advanced physics or a highly realistic feel of movement from such a game. All said and done, Aiden's movements feel off on many occasions. It just feels like it has not been polished enough, lacking a satisfactory flow. Aiden feels laggy and flanky. When he jumps, he floats uncontrollably and cannot land where you want him to. When he turns around, it doesn't feel sharp or smooth, it feels weird. During combat, feels like there is an invisible wall next to the enemies. You can go through them, but just before sliding under them, your character transitions to an animation where he runs in front of the enemy, staying still like he's running on a treadmill. Also, when you want to get away while fighting against a group of enemies, you dodge roll a lot. Sometimes Aiden slides behind the enemy instead of rolling and getting further away from the scene. You may intend to escape from a group of enemies, especially when targeting a sniper, but instead you end up right behind the enemy you were trying to avoid. One last thing that was personally frustrating for me was the lack of diagonal climbing. It might not be that important for many players, but I think it is very frustrating to first climb vertically and then sideways, instead of directly climbing diagonally, especially given the fact that Aiden has an extra arm that he could use for such laborious situations. Speaking of the third arm, it is the trademark of the game, an important selling point that differentiates this game from other platformers to some extent. And it is not just a gimmick, it is heavily involved in the story, becoming an essential theme from the very beginning to the very end. There is a praiseworthy attempt to utilize it in the gameplay as well. You can find power clusters with the scanner and break them with our third arm to open a service hatch in our way. You can also activate the scanner with our third arm to mark criminals who have a bounty on their heads and teleport them after neutralizing them. On a side note, this mechanic is quite impractical, as after a short while it turns out to be a slow and laborious process in such a fast-paced game. However, it does contribute to the bounty hunter theme and earns you the much needed extra credits to spend on an extensive upgrade tree. Other than that, in combat we use the third arm to break enemy blocks, which costs us a bioenergy bar. It is a mechanic in itself. Another use is to break walls that we cannot normally break with our hands, adding a little variety in the platforms. Most of the time, the third arm is an instrument that we use more usually than practically. Aiden has animations in which he uses his third arm when climbing walls, ladders and pipes. He has 3 swords and he can parry up to 3 enemies at the same time. He can also shoot up to 3 enemies with his 3 pistols. Despite all these mechanics, it seems like the third arm could be more creatively engaged as a gameplay mechanic rather than for actions that other characters could easily perform with their 2 arms. The third arm can extend from its place and rotate freely, yet Aiden only uses it to hold onto the rope while sliding down a zipline. They missed out on the opportunity to create an innovative mechanic for the game. This game is not a must-buy, but in some levels I felt like I would have missed a lot if I didn't buy it. Some of the chasing and escaping scenes feel like I'm playing sequences from monumental games like Mirror's Edge or Dying Light. These running sequences are where the game shines most, and they do justice to the game's title. Alas, they are quite limited in number. Unlike the chase sequences, the combat does not offer anything extraordinary. All levels are filled to the brim with enemies and obviously they put a lot of effort to character animations. The experience is nothing short of watching a martial arts movie. However, one big problem is the lack of enemy variety. There are mainly 3 types of enemies with different skins depending on the planet we are on. The first type is the basic enemy with a sword or axe in his hand. We can counter-attack and break his block. The second type is an enemy with a shield. We either need to break his block with our third arm or slide behind him and attack from behind if he is only on a shield. We cannot counter-attack him, so we need to dodge roll when he attacks. And lastly, changing the combat loop altogether, there is a sniper or sometimes a bomber, an enemy with a ranged weapon. These enemies are defenseless, but it is harder to dodge their attack while fighting a group of melee enemies. You can deflect their bullets if you activate the required skill, but you need to be pixel perfect or you're going to get shot. Most of the time it's just easier to dodge the bullets. So a basic combat loop is that we run after these snipers and take them out first, so that we can deal with other enemies more easily. As other enemy types, bosses follow similar patterns that become recognizable quite easily after a short while. You wait for them to finish their attack pattern and then strike them down. It is nothing fabulous. The only boss fight I kind of enjoyed was against the sea creature because platforming elements were effectively used, offering a shift in the combat loop. Other than that, the boss fights were mediocre at best. Engaging in combat for the first few times might be quite entertaining because they always look spectacular. Everything appears handcrafted and each level has its own peculiarity. The soundtrack adds to the overall atmosphere and the animation is delicately put together. Additionally, the new skills offer a little variety to the gameplay. However, after a while, you feel stuck in the same combat loop with the same enemies each time. Kill snipers, dodge shields, slash the rest. and repeat the process for the rest of the game. If the game was a little bit longer, my opinions will change drastically. What I like most about the game is its pace. Everything is just right to the point. Fast-paced gameplay and no-nonsense storytelling. The average length of the game is about 6 or 7 hours, which in my opinion is neither too long or too short, and just the right amount of time considering the content it offers. Even better, the overall gameplay time between the story bits, dialogue, combat and platforming is so perfectly balanced that it does not bore you. This is a game that is very much aware of what it offers, how long it can keep the player engaged with its mechanics and its core gameplay loop. They Always Run has a promising story, solid lore to support the narrative, and an exquisite combination of art style, soundtrack and animations. It is put together quite well. The downsides are the cliffhanger ending, sloppy character movement, and the lack of enemy variety. To sum up, They Always Run does not leave its mark on the annals of 2D platformers like Mark of Amnesia, Celeste, Ori and the Blind Forest or Hollow Knight, but it doesn't need to, and it does not aim to. It is a game that I would recommend to anyone, kind of game that you binge over the weekend and leave quite satisfied. That is, if you're not stuck on the cliffhanger.
But I will travel high to meet you here, and that must be chill when lovers feeling we're still, until you're wearing these and more, and